Hello, welcome to Design Everest TV. I am Negin, and today in our program we have Dale Cummins, Chief Architect of Cummins Architecture and Designs, with me. Dale, welcome to the program. Before
Thank
we
you.
jump into the topic of the program, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? When did you start?
Oh, I've been an architect in California since 1982. I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo for architecture, which is one of the nicest areas in California, Central Coast.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for being with us. I wanted to start with the crisis that we are facing in California, the housing crisis that everybody's talking about. Can you put a light on it and talk about what is the depths of this crisis?
I'd be glad to. Primarily housing in California, particularly near the the greater Los Angeles region, and the larger cities, San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego. Housing prices have skyrocketed in the last few years. Starter homes in some of these areas exceed $1 million. And what's happened because of this is that let's say middle class income of all different kinds of jobs and experience, many of those people have to work several hours from where they live. In some cases, over 2.5 hour commute because they have to go that far to find a piece of property or an apartment that they can afford. A perfect example of that is our daughter works with us, and she lives in Palo Alto. They're fortunate enough they're actually in Stanford area, but many of the teachers that teach in that area, in order for them to have a place to live, they're driving 2.5 hours to and from. Many of the workers that work in the city of Palo Alto can't afford to live there. So this is repeated over and over in various locations in California. And what the state government has done to try to mitigate what we've defined as a housing crisis is to allow homeowners of single-family residences now to build what we call an ADU. It's called an accessory dwelling unit. If you Google it, you can find out all kinds of great information about it, but I'll just give you a quick summary of it. There's several types. Actually, I'll give you three basic types of ADUs. One, you can modify your garage and make it a legal apartment unit. You do not have to have a garage anymore. Now, I know this is real controversial, okay? So some places it works, some places it's ugly, okay? As architects, we try to make it look as appealing as we can and functional as we can. But so that we'll come back to that one in a minute. The other one is a freestanding ADU, which is basically a small house in the backyard. We happen to live in an area called Rancho Cucamonga, which is I think it's about 50 miles east of Los Angeles. And many of the homes in this area are on properties or lots that are maybe a quarter acre or half acre, or even in some cases an acre. Perfect unit to be able to put a 1,200 square foot in the back of that home. And it's a great way for people that are retiring, seniors, or family members that are coming back home in an effort to consolidate and reduce their costs. They can add a second home, have their own independent living area, but still be part of the family.
It's really interesting, but the main question still is how much it actually resolved the housing crisis.
Well, you can build these quickly, and you can build them virtually in every location where you have a single family residence existing. Now, that's one thing that we do. We specialize in this work. So it's one thing that we do. We look at ways to do that kind of outside the box, quote unquote. You could, I'm kind of laugh here because I always ask people if they want a basement in California, and I said, we can put a basement in, then you can rent that as an apartment. It's funny because a couple of times people have said yes, and we've done it for them. It's not the normal way to build an ADU, but it's possible. You can actually build a third story in many locations in residential zones because you're allowed to go to 35 feet, and most homes are nowhere near 35 feet high. So that's another unusual way to do an ADU. The easiest way is to build a small house in the backyard when you've got space. The next way is if, let's say you have a house that's too big, okay, there's a lot of couples that, had the kids that went to college and never came back, right? So they have this 6,000 square foot house. What do we do with it? Well, you can split it vertically and make it 2 units. And you're now allowed to do that legally. The reason this helps solve the housing crisis is these are what they call additional living units or roofs, because now you've got 2 for 1. They're already built for the most part. You're splitting them in 2 and you make 2 functional living spaces instead of 1. So that's what they're doing, and that's why they're proposing, because there's no way they can keep up with the number of living spaces that are needed in California. Plus the cost. Obviously, if you can live and function as smaller square footage area, your costs are less, your overheads less, your utilities are less. And as a matter of fact, the first house my wife and I moved into, and this is kind of funny because it was about a 1945 kind of time frame when it was built. It was a rectangle. It was 1,000 square feet, and it was a 4-bedroom. Okay, so if you do the math on that, those bedrooms are really small. But anyway, so you can actually have a pretty comfortable living situation in an ADU, 1,200 square feet. I think they're limited to 2 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, but 1,200 square feet is very comfortable. And that's the maximum size for a freestanding ADU. You can also build an ADU by modifying an existing garage, like a lot of times. Many people have, in California, 3-car garages. I know that's unusual for where you are, but we have 3-car garages. And the funny part is most people put their storage and then they park their $100,000 cars outside, because the weather's not that bad here. But you can take that garage that's not doing anything and turn it into a living unit for somebody, either for somebody in your family or as a rental to help reduce your costs. So as this COVID-19 thing is going around, all of a sudden, you don't really want to put your seniors in separate living, which has been very, very common in California, because you got a real problem. Number one, they're totally isolated. We have our in-laws are in a very, very nice facility in Claremont, right? But they're in lockdown. They're not even allowed to go out of their unit. I mean, thank goodness their unit is actually a freestanding small house, almost like an ADU. Okay, I think it's about 1,200 square feet, but it's a house and they have a yard so they can go in their yard. But if you were in an apartment building, you wouldn't even have anything more than a little tiny balcony. Okay, and people would rather stay connected with their extended families, and the ADU is a great way to do that. The interesting thing is it's hard to get this message out about ADUs in California right now because of the turmoil with society with this, social distancing.
Exactly. I wanted to ask, what is the social aspect of it? Because everyone is saying you have to do social distancing, but the ADUs, if the houses are smaller and the spaces are less distances between houses, would that pose a problem?
No, not at all. It actually solves a problem because, for example, let's just take a 1,200 square foot house that would go in our backyard, for example. Well, another family or a couple can live there. You're socially distanced, even though you've increased the density of the specific single family unit. So you have not compromised the issue about health safety with distancing. You've actually improved it. Plus, you've improved the psychological makeup. I don't, how you put it, the psyche of the individuals living there, because there's still outside contact with other family members. Okay, and even if it's outside in the yard and barbecue, whatever, at least they all have their own spaces, their own defined spaces. I mean, imagine how much better it would be to move into an ADU if, let's say, I don't know, just somebody loses their job, they have a small family, and they got to come back home, quote unquote. Well, they may come back home, but they can come back home into their own living unit on that single family residence. This was never permitted until I think maybe around 2015, California started moving into allowing this. Now, obviously, it's got to be done tastefully and architecturally, so it matches the architecture of the main house and things like that. But that's, we do that all the time, so that's easy to do.
You mentioned the change in the law. You had a massive change in the law since January in California that allowed a
Yes,
lot of,
we improved
the
it.
state law. How did that affect your business? Was there more requests for the ADUs?
What's happening is it's kind of rolling out into the highest real estate areas first. Okay, so there's areas like up north in San Jose, and Los Angeles. Los Angeles County has embraced this. The number of ADU unit permit requests has skyrocketed, and it's now moving out into the the other more rural areas. It is a tremendous way for someone to be able to create partial income to pay their mortgage payment. Let's say they, heaven forbid, they lost their job or the job situation changed. They can now rent part of their home, stay in their home, and actually have that unit help pay for the mortgage. So it's a consolidation tactic or approach, but there's also a social need attached to needing more places for people to live at a more reasonable price.
This picture is all like, happy and flowery, but what is the downside of it?
The downside of an ADU?
For the client, yeah.
That's interesting. Well, I'm sorry, but I can't come up with a downside. The downside might be that there are some areas that it would be restrictive, or it just wouldn't it fit attractively. It is higher density. It's more, as a matter of fact, it's more of a downside for the cities, and that's the reason the city planning departments have been resisting this for years and years and years. And they've resisted it so much that it's literally a housing crisis at this point. Okay. And I understand, they don't want too many people living in one house and those kinds of things. But the ADU is actually a very, very good compromise from having 2 or 3 families live in one house to having 2 families in 2 houses on one piece of property.
Do you think that mindset would ever change? Because this problem you mentioned with the planning section of the cities, this been repeated by whoever I talk to about ADUs in California. Like, everyone is mentioning this challenge. Do you think, is there a way to change the mindset for them?
Well, it's been mandated at the state level, and they have to rethink this. They've been instructed to increase the number of living units in these areas because the demand is just so high. If they don't, it's going to push more people into a homeless situation. And it's actually ridiculous to think that someone would have to get in a car and drive for 2.5 hours to go to work. I mean, the pollutants, the inefficiency, the wear and tear on the person, the vehicles, the society is incredible. So from that aspect, they are going to have to rethink it, and they are rethinking it. But some of them are my friends. So some of them are coming kicking and screaming, okay? And that's why all of this has to be discussed and worked out. But the state has basically said, you now are allowed to do this. And some people, it's funny because I have a friend that was a planning director for over 30 years, and he just looks at it as increased density, to make more money for the developers. Well, it's housing. It's housing, and there's a need for housing. And actually, it fits in very well with my generation, millennials, that have houses that are too big. And they don't want to leave where they live. They're in a nice neighborhood. They got a great house. Well, why not, instead of, when you sell that house and buy another house, it costs you about 40% by the time everything's done. I mean, it's crazy expensive. And then you have to leave that area, go to some other area. Why not stay there, modify where you are, and have it help pay for you? I mean, there's some great examples up here where people are in 3, 4, 5,000 square foot house. They're on a half-acre lot. They could build an ADU, retire in place, and rent the front and live with no mortgage payment. There's the upside. There's a real upside on that one.
Yeah. So if we look around California, what are the best places at the moment to build an ADU unit?
One of the best areas right now is LA County because they have they've moved forward quickly with it. Let's see, I think up in Marin County, up near Palo Alto area, they're moving forward. It's just like city government. Each planning department within the city government is now required to adopt these state regulations, and some of them are kicking and screaming more than others. Okay, for example, the state now allows you to build an ADU within 4 feet of your rear and side property lines. That allows you to do a lot more with the location of, say, a secondary home in the backyard than you could ever do before.
I'm going to go back to COVID-19 and its effect on the housing in California, especially how you approaching building these new houses you're talking about. What is the process you're taking now? And then can people still build houses?
Let me show you this. We're building I don't know if you want to see the manufacturer or not, but this is a SIP wall panel system, okay? And what it is this is a cross section of it. It comes out, there's plywood on one side, styrofoam in the middle, plywood on the other side. And this basically is a wall system that we get the walls pre-cut and delivered to the site. We can assemble the SIP, with the SIP system, we can assemble this in 3 days. So we can actually build a 1,200 square foot house enclosed in 3 days. Now, obviously, there's more work on both ends of that, but that's a great process for responding to COVID quickly. Oh, and that reminds me of something else that's very fascinating. Part of the state law that requires the planning and building department to issue you a permit within 60 days. If they have not responded and resolved all those issues within 60 days, you automatically have a permit to start construction. So there's a real, call it a zinger in there to the building departments to respond quickly. So that's another one of the state mandates. So we can move very quickly to respond to housing needs.
Perfect. Is there any other points you want to point out?
Oh, on the COVID situation, yeah, I think socially it's very important to understand that because of this, everyone is going to want to be dispersed somewhat. Imagine a 5-story, 10-story apartment complex downtown Los Angeles where you have to get in an elevator with 12 or 15 other people. Even if you have masks on, that's not going to be a comfortable situation. So having your own separate living unit is the demand for this is going to go way up. Well, you can see that already.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time, Dale Cummins from Cummins Architecture and Design.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It was a very interesting discussion.